So basically, this is kind of just a story of me coming in, teaching in a big classroom, teaching an applied course, and then how I felt it wasn't working, and some of the strategies in discussion with the students, and how that might have worked. And I suppose for me, neurodiversity is an umbrella term for a range of different neurological challenges, and they're often referred to as specific learning difficulties, developmental disorders. And they can include dyslexia, dyspraxia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyscalculia, autism spectrum, Tourette syndrome, and many more. And some of the challenges for neurodiverse students, and probably for all students, are difficulties around reading speed, note-taking, spelling, proofreading, deciphering academic language at speed, and memory retrieval are all common characteristics of being a neurodivergent and are very often needed in a large and noisy classroom. So I'll just move on, please. Thanks. So some context around both the classroom setting and the university. So the university is a technological university. We teach mainly applied courses where graduates would be considered job ready when they're finished the courses. And 90% of our students enter via the traditional route in Ireland, which would be they do 6 years of secondary school, do leaving cert examinations, score points, and then would come in that route. We also have lots of non-traditional students who come in under a different way. So what we did at the time, we delivered a 3-hour lecture where we would try to incorporate structured learning activities, throw a load of content out, try and have interaction, engagement, feedback, etc. The class sizes, depending on the modules, were anything from 60 to 120, and then often much bigger than 120 if they were shared across programs or had Erasmus students as such. And these were considered a large classroom. Although, listening to Jacqueline and some people from DCU, I kind of feel a bit embarrassed saying 120 is a large classroom. But in my context, it was. And I know Kerr suggests that the term is often contested, but from my work, the focus is not so much on the large class size, but on how the pedagogical practices can be affected by class sizes. So the courses are a more hands-on approach, and this may be difficult to achieve in the large classes. Teaching practices which were used when I first came were kind of that Ferrari banking model, whereby I would stand at the top of the lecture theatre and impart the content. Didactic and transmissive approaches to teaching and learning, which, for example, includes me standing at the podium talking at students rather than teaching strategies which would encourage them to participate and engage. So these didactic and transmissive approaches can often be non-productive in a large classroom environment. And I found students were becoming easily lost, especially students who identified as being neurodivergent. This then impacted on attendance. Attendance dropped off quite heavily, engagement and participation were practically non-existent. And these were all really largely impacted by that style I was using. So what do all good educators do? We go off and we reflect, and we do some self-reflecting, and I've done a lot of this on my pedagogical practices. I spoke then with my school, my department head, and I came up with some changes that I tried to initiate. So just next one, please. So in these large classrooms or lecture halls, the challenges for neurodiverse students can be intensified. Noise, not understanding, moving too quickly, all of these things really heighten the tension, and then we lose them, as it does for probably a lot of students as well. So using the traditional banking or talking at them approach to teaching, students became very bored. And I noticed this. I mean, you can read a room, you can feel the energy of the room dropping. They started to talk among themselves, the disruption, you see them on their phones, and the noise levels would increase in the room. Particularly, suppose down the back where it's difficult to get to. One of the lecture theatres was over like 2 floors of a building. So consequently, due to the noise levels and then the overstimulation being heightened of a neurodiverse person, these factors made it even more difficult to learn in the large groups in these particular 3-hour long lectures, which was horrendous trying to do 3 consecutive hours of teaching. So I began to think, like, how do I, or even we, as educators, create a learning environment that's inclusive for all students, regardless of our class size? So while exploring the large class environment, how do we engage all of the students all of the time, or even some of the time? And then I also was thinking about later on, is it feasible to be able to use the universal design for learning model in this space? or if applied courses are being taught that require discussion around sometimes sensitive material and experiential learning, and often with vulnerable communities. Within these large learning thesis spaces, do we need to reflect on the traditional methods of teaching to make them more inclusive? So after more reflecting, more self-reflecting, I decided then to go and consult with the experts, the students themselves. So I came up then with some ideas to get feedback from the students, see what they said, what they didn't say. And some people had said to me, like, why bother getting feedback from them? As I said, I believe them to be the experts. They're the ones in the room on their phone talking and getting lost. And feedback is often described as information about reactions to a product, a person's performance of a task. And then that's used as a basis of improvement. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to ask them what did they like, what did they not like, etc., etc., and to use what they say back to me and to take on board what I taught myself and then try and improve how things work. So during the last class of each semester, we always do a roundup of the year, and we always discuss final assessments or exams, etc., etc. So this usually means you have a high attendance and a high engagement because of the nature of the last class. So I've decided to take advantage of this, and I got the students to complete a short feedback sheet. I just gave a simple sheet with 4 simple questions. And I just wanted some feedback from them to help me to try and improve the content and the teaching and learning for the students. So this was for me a much better way to record any findings within such a large classroom. I asked the students, what did you dislike about the module? And a large portion of the feedback was related to class being too noisy, there's too much chitter-chatter going on, I can't think, I can't hear, the content is too difficult to navigate, etc., etc. So a lot of the comments were related to the large classroom environment. And also there was some comments around my PowerPoints and the academic language I was using, PowerPoints which were text only but very heavy in text. And then around the assessments I was doing and the assistive technology. So all this discussion led me to reflect on my pedagogy and implement some changes within the practice. And I'll just move on, thanks a million. So the biggest challenge, I'm just going to read this out so I don't forget any of it. The biggest challenge implemented in the large classes, which I felt gave rise to the specific pedagogical challenges, particularly in relation to inclusion and accessibility. So I had a discussion where I had a school who is brilliant. She's really supportive. We went to the head of the university, the head of the department in schools, and we made some changes to how we deliver the content, and it was brought to program board and all initiated now. So the 3-hour lecture was changed, and we just give a 2-hour lecture now, and then we break the groups up into smaller groups, tutorial groups. So depending on which class you were in, your tutorial group could be 20, 24, 26, or 28 students, but there's always only a maximum of 28 students. So you did your 2-hour lecture, we covered all the content of that week's topic, and then within the smaller room, we had little discussions, we did the applied part, and we also might talk about things that you wouldn't talk in the bigger group, okay, specific to the smaller group. So students reported back then that this worked much better as they received the content in the whole group. However, when they sat in the smaller groups, it provided the space for the applied work to be carried out in a safe space, and discussion was meaningful and they learned better, is what they fed back. Some other changes I made from the feedback and the interaction with the students was around the content I was using. So I used much less text in my PowerPoints, and I included more images, and I used more visuals. And apologies, I'm just quickly going through this because there's a lot, and it's mainly in the paper then as well. So an interesting thing was I included full stops on my PowerPoints. I never did this before, but we had some students who had visual impairments, hearing impairments, etc. And they were saying that when they read my PowerPoints without full stops, there was just one sentence. It never stopped. So they got lost and felt they couldn't engage. But when I put the full stops in, and I have an audio there, it became things like PowerPoints, Word documents, releasing information. So they knew it was a specific thing, and it moved on to a second thing. And it was very interesting to hear that because I had no idea, I just didn't put in full stops. So all my notes on our shared learning spaces were changed from PDFs into Word documents. I suggested to them that if they came to a Word document, they seen a theory, or they didn't understand a word or some academic theory or whatever, if they just put a little comment to the side of it, Google it, read about it, whatever way they wanted to explain it to themselves, write it in the comment box So if they were looking the next day, they had it, or going down the line, they could always refer back to it. And it became like a bit of a glossary of terms for them in some degree as well. Sorry, so I started releasing the PowerPoint the morning before lectures as opposed to after the lectures. And I know there's an argument around this stops attendance and everything else, but again, we can't control everything, and students will attend regardless of whether they have the PowerPoint before or after the lecture. But the students fed back that was really good for them because they could look at it, do it. I said with the Word document, Google Words, explain them. So when I said it for the first time, they weren't hearing it for the first time. They had some idea about the context of it, and then I would explain in greater detail. So again, it allowed the students to view the content and examine any words. Because when neurodiverse students are encountering things like academic terminology or things they've never heard before, they spend a lot of time trying to decipher it, work it out. And by the time they've kind of understood your first sentence, you might have moved on 3 or 4 sentences, and they become very frustrated and very lost. And this is what they fed back, and it's also within my own research. So assessments then for students, we sat down and agreed to vary up the assessments, okay? So rather than just the 2 standard, bog standard, as I call it, essays, I worked with them around some ideas that they want. So we decided on the first essay would be a presentation type essay, and they could deliver that. We worked in groups of 4 within your tutorial. So you worked there with, relationship, you knew the people in the tutorial and that. So they worked together in their groups of 4, and they could either do normal presentation, they could do a video, they could do a role play, or any other means that they wanted to do. They had the criteria, and then they gave it back through that way as opposed to writing. They would have to do like a paper as well. Then the second assessment we did was just an online short multiple choice question. And I gave them a couple of chances to kind of decide. And then it was a research, introduction to research module. So the last one then was a research proposal style academic essay, which they had to do. Now, this was easy enough for me to implement because my modules were all 100% continuous assessment. But the students said they really enjoyed the process. They felt as if they had some control over the learning and how they were assessed, and they enjoyed having that ownership. They enjoyed having that autonomy and also expression. They enjoyed being able to express themselves. Some other stuff I changed was the font style. I changed sometimes around the Verdana. It's a separate study I've done, and that was found to be the preferred font. I know now that Inclusion Ireland are doing something around Verdana as well, and the British Dyslexic Association have also done a big survey in England about changing Verdana to be the preferred one. Students fed back that this was also much better for them. Some other changes I made was including voice content on some of the slides, a brief recording, links to short YouTube videos, which I'd never used before, and putting them on, interacting in class. They really enjoy that. I talk, they get a break from me, they see other things coming on. And also a lot of people, you can tell them what's what when they see it on a video, particularly the platforms the students use. YouTube is probably ancient to them, but it works for me. But then the larger spaces were still coming back. That 2-hour lecture with the big classes, students were still reporting back difficulties to me around note-taking, comprehension, the memory calling of the specific subject-related language. And this was all amplified within the space. So some ways we came up to compensate for this was using some assistive technology. So again, the voiceover on the slides, that was an option for them. So they could link in earphones, they could link in their phone to the Bluetooth. So they could link in and hear me talking on the PowerPoint if they were getting distracted or couldn't hear. So that feedback has been helpful. So I allowed them to be on their phones, even just to Google Words. Obviously, they could be wherever. I couldn't control everything. And then we agreed.
Just time, Pete. Just getting to time.
Sorry, yeah, almost there. So we agreed to then have a non-share of any of the recordings, because I allowed some of the students in the big recordings, if they wanted, was to use live scribe pens. So that's just a pen that records the lecture, and you have a special notebook. And you can Google that as well. It's quite an interesting thing. So then finishing up on the last slide, it's just, I suppose, it's called challenges and opportunities. So, I mean, I found the UDL principles difficult to implement in the large class due to time constraints, disturbance, attention, and the effort it took. However, within the smaller tutorial style, opportunities to use the UDL principles was much easier to incorporate into teaching and learning space. This allowed both myself and the students greater representation, engagement, and discussion. Action and expression was also evident due to discussions to build interpersonal connections and the learners, allowing students to demonstrate their skills and competences in multiple ways. Almost done on it. So create and structure learning activities that help students stay focused and engaged, breaking down content into smaller digestible chunks, incorporating interactive elements, providing opportunities for movement or hands-on learning, incorporating feedback from students, developing options for students to customize their experiences, and can help accommodate diverse needs and preferences. And I found they also provided a more inclusive learning space and greater opportunities for students. Implementing inclusive teaching practices can help create a supportive learning environment for all students. And this may involve incorporating the UDL principles into course materials and activities, such as providing multiple modes of representation, expression, and engagement. Additionally, fostering a culture of respect and understanding among students can encourage empathy and support for other students who may experience sensory challenges or other challenges. And then just to finish up, human variation exists in all walks of life, not just neurodiversity. And when we reflect on our own pedagogical practices, we can make change, which will enhance our teaching and learning environments and help all people to try to reach their full potential. Thanks very much.